"Get out of my wedding right now," shouted a millionaire as he forced his elderly mother to leave his wedding. The next day he was shocked when his mother showed up on his honeymoon with 3 police cars. The banquet hall shone in its maximum elegance. Crystals hung from the ceiling like stars frozen in time, while arrangements of white flowers adorned each meticulously prepared table. The mansion, surrounded by impeccable gardens, was transformed into a fairy tale setting for the most talked-about wedding of the year. At the center of all attention was Robert, a successful businessman, 45 years of age, tall, with slightly graying hair at the temples that gave him an air of distinction. His dark eyes, usually analytical and calculating in business, today overflowed with emotion as he contemplated his bride, Christine. He adjusted the tie of his elegant black suit, nervous like a teenager on his first date, and smiled at the guests who approached to congratulate him. "I never thought that at 45 I could feel like this, as if life were just beginning," Robert confessed to a group of friends surrounding him with champagne glasses in hand. Christine was the type of woman who provoked involuntary sighs. At 32, she possessed a natural elegance that made it seem as if she had been born to wear the wedding dress that now enveloped her like a second skin. Brown hair fell in soft waves, framing a face of delicate features where hypnotizing green eyes stood out. Her crystalline laughter echoed through the hall as she walked among the guests, touching arms, distributing kisses and thanks, as if she knew everyone intimately, despite having entered Robert's life just a few months ago. She constantly looked over the shoulders of guests, searching for her new husband, with a smile that never left her perfectly outlined lips. "This is just the beginning of our story, darling," she whispered in Robert's ear when she finally managed a moment alone with him, her fingers playing with the lapel of his suit. "I have so many plans for us." Seated at a table further from the center of attention, Margaret observed everything with attentive eyes. At 70, Robert's mother maintained an elegant posture and a sharp mind. Her completely white hair was arranged in a traditional bun, and she wore a dark blue dress that, despite being elegant, seemed to want to make her disappear into the crowd. Her eyes, the same dark shade as her son's, couldn't hide the concern she felt. Since the first meeting with Christine, something about that dazzling woman had triggered an alert in her mother's heart. The speed of the relationship, the way Christine seemed to know exactly what to say and how to act to charm her son, the way she had subtly begun to distance him from his family and closest friends. They were small details that added up to form a disturbing picture. "Something isn't right," Margaret murmured to herself, sipping a glass of water without taking her eyes off her daughter-in-law. Nobody is that perfect without hiding something. The celebration was at its peak when Margaret's cell phone vibrated discreetly in her small, elegant purse. She picked it up with slightly trembling hands, not accustomed to receiving messages, especially at a moment like that. The illuminated screen showed a message from an unknown number. Intrigued, she touched to open it and felt her heart skip a beat. It was a photograph that made the air escape from her lungs as if she had been punched. In the image, clearly recent, Christine smiled radiantly in another wedding dress, beside another man at another altar. The message below the photo was short and direct. "She is not who she claims to be. Third marriage this year." "My God!" gasped Margaret, her free hand flying to cover her mouth in shock. "My son is being deceived." Quickly, Margaret rose from the table, ignoring the curious glances from other guests. Her heart beat strongly against her chest as she tried to locate Robert among the elegant crowd that filled the hall. The loud music, laughter, and conversations made it difficult to concentrate. She finally spotted him near the dance floor, chatting animatedly with some business partners. But before she could take 3 steps in his direction, Christine appeared, as if materialized from nowhere, and linked her arm with Robert's, whispering something in his ear that made him smile and immediately follow her to another group of guests. "She's keeping him away from me on purpose," thought Margaret, feeling a determination growing within her. "I won't allow this woman to destroy my son." Over the next hour, Margaret repeatedly tried to approach Robert, but Christine seemed to guess her intentions, always finding an excuse to drag her new husband away. Frustration grew inside the lady, along with the desperation of knowing that each passing minute was one more minute for the scam, whatever it was, to materialize. Margaret watched as Christine whispered something in Robert's ear and discreetly pointed in her direction, making her son look at his mother with an expression that mixed irritation and distrust. It was at that moment that Margaret realized Christine was poisoning her son's mind against her. "She has already begun to separate us," Margaret noted, clutching her cell phone in her hand as if it were a lifeline. "I need to act now before it's too late." The opportunity arose when Robert headed to the men's bathroom. Margaret, gathering all her courage, positioned herself in the hallway to intercept him on his way out. When he opened the door, he seemed surprised to find his mother there, with such a serious expression. "Son, we need to talk urgently," said Margaret, holding Robert's arm with surprising firmness for her age. "It's about Christine. She is not who you think." Robert's face, previously relaxed by the day's joy and the effect of champagne, instantly hardened. His eyes, so similar to his mother's, turned cold. "Don't start with this, Mother. Not today." But Margaret was determined. She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and showed the photo to her son. "Look, I received this just now. It's her at another recent wedding. She's a scammer, son. She's deceiving you." Robert looked at the photo for a moment, his face impossible to read. Then, to Margaret's despair, he let out a bitter laugh. Is this the best attempt you could come up with to ruin my marriage? An obviously manipulated photo sent by someone anonymous, perhaps by you yourself. How can you think that of me?" Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes. "I'm trying to protect you. This woman appeared out of nowhere, pulled you away from everyone who loves you, and in less than a year is already married to you. Don't you see what's happening?" The discussion began to attract curious glances from nearby guests. Christine, as if she had a sixth sense, appeared beside them, her face a perfect mask of concern. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, placing a delicate hand on Robert's arm, while casting an icy look at Margaret. "No, it's not," Robert replied, his voice now loud enough for several guests to hear. The champagne had reduced his inhibitions, and the frustration he had been accumulating about his mother's constant disapproval of his relationship finally overflowed. "My mother decided that our wedding would be the perfect time to show me fake photos and accuse you of being a scammer." The entire room seemed to freeze. The music continued playing, but conversations ceased. All eyes turned to the trio at the center of an emotional storm that was rapidly forming. Christine brought her hands to her face, in a perfect demonstration of shock and hurt, while instant tears sprang from her green eyes. "How can you say that about me?" she asked with a choked voice, addressing Margaret. "After everything I tried to do to get close to you, to be a good daughter-in-law." Margaret felt cornered. Christine's performance was impeccable, and she could see in the eyes of everyone present that they were all on the side of the young and beautiful bride against the bitter and jealous old mother. "Robert, please listen to me. I have reasons to believe she is not who she claims to be. I'm just asking you to investigate before it's too late." It was the last straw. Robert, his face red with anger and shame, exploded. "Leave my wedding now. You've always been against my happiness. You always thought no woman was good enough for your precious son. Well, guess what? I found someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can do for her. Something you never understood." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt as if each word was a knife piercing her heart. She looked at her son, at that boy she had raised alone after becoming a widow so young, at the man he had become, and saw only a stranger dominated by anger. She looked at Christine, and for a brief moment caught something in the woman's eyes. A glimmer of triumph quickly masked by more artificial tears. "You are making a terrible mistake," Margaret finally said, her voice low but firm. "And when you realize it, I'll be waiting for you, because I am your mother, and that will never change." Two security guards approached, discreetly called by a gesture from Christine. They flanked Margaret, not touching her, but making it clear that she should leave. The humiliation was complete. With what dignity she could muster, Margaret straightened her shoulders and walked through the hall toward the exit, feeling hundreds of judgmental gazes burning into her back. Some older guests, longtime friends, seemed dismayed, but no one dared to interfere. "That's right. Get that crazy old woman out of here before she ruins the happiest day of my life even more," Christine said, loud enough for Margaret to hear, but soft enough that her voice seemed choked with tears to everyone else. Outside the mansion, The night was cool and starry, in cruel contrast to the emotional storm Margaret was facing. The driver who had brought her and Robert to the ceremony waited patiently in the car. Seeing Margaret approaching alone, with silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face, he quickly got out of the vehicle to help her in. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked worriedly, noticing her emotional state. Margaret merely nodded, unable to speak. When she finally settled into the back seat of the luxurious car, she allowed the tears to flow freely. Years of memories with her son passed through her mind: his first step, his graduation, his professional successes, the moments of fragility that only a mother knew. How had they reached this point? How had that woman managed to infiltrate Robert's life so completely that he would reject his own mother? "Home, please," she finally murmured to the driver, who started the engine in silence, respecting her grief. As the car glided through the city streets, moving away from the party that continued in full swing, Margaret took out her cell phone again. She looked at the photo she had received, enlarging it to study every detail. There was no doubt it was Christine, the same calculated smile, the same hypnotic green eyes. Who had sent that message? Was it another victim? Someone who knew Christine's scheme and was trying to warn her? "I won't give up on my son," Margaret said aloud, wiping away her tears with renewed determination. "No matter what happens, I'll find out who you really are, Christine, and I'll save my son from your clutches." Meanwhile, back at the reception hall, Christine had transformed the incident into a demonstration of her fragility and the unconditional love that Robert felt for her. He embraced her protectively as she sobbed delicately against his chest. "I'm so sorry about this, my love," he said, stroking her hair. "My mother has always been controlling, but I never thought she would go this far." Christine raised her face, bathed in perfectly calculated tears. "I just wanted her to accept me, to be part of our happiness," she said with a trembling voice. "Perhaps with time." "Don't worry about her now," Robert interrupted, kissing her forehead. "Today is our day. Nothing will ruin this." Christine smiled through her tears, a smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. Over Robert's shoulder, she observed the guests slowly returning to their conversations and the celebration. Everything was going exactly as planned. The meddling mother had been eliminated. In a matter of days, when they were on their honeymoon, she would begin the gradual transfer of Robert's funds to anonymous offshore accounts. One more month, and she would disappear completely, leaving behind only debts and a broken heart. "Shall we dance, darling?" she asked, gently pulling him to the dance floor. "I want this moment to last forever." And as they twirled to the sound of romantic music, under the envious gaze of guests witnessing what appeared to be perfect love, no one noticed the calculating gleam in Christine's eyes. No one except Margaret, who, now in the back seat of the car taking her home, looked at the mysterious message on her cell phone and made a decision that would change the course of events more than Christine could imagine. "The game has only begun," Margaret whispered to herself, typing a response to the unknown number. "Who are you and how can we stop her?" The next morning dawned cold and grey, as if the sky itself shared Margaret's state of mind. She hadn't slept, her red and swollen eyes betraying the night spent awake, turning over in her mind every moment, every word, every gesture exchanged during her son's disastrous wedding. She had exchanged some messages with the mysterious contact, but the responses were vague, only confirming her suspicions without offering concrete proof that could convince Robert. Determined, Margaret dressed in simple but elegant clothes, grabbed her bag with the documents and the received photograph, and left home with firm steps toward the only place where she thought she could find help. The office of the city's most respected newspaper was located downtown, in an old building that contrasted with the modern skyscrapers around it, just as the vehicle's journalistic integrity contrasted with the sensationalist media that dominated current times. "I can't let my son fall into this trap," Margaret muttered to herself as she climbed the building's steps with determination. "That woman won't destroy everything he's built." At the newspaper's reception, the movement was intense, with young journalists running back and forth, phones ringing incessantly, and the unmistakable smell of strong coffee permeating the air. Margaret felt momentarily lost, a 70-year-old lady amid the organized chaos of a newsroom. A receptionist noticed her and approached with a polite but hurried smile. When Margaret asked for Teresa, the young woman seemed surprised, but indicated a path through the maze of desks and computers. At the back of the large room, separated only by glass partitions, was a smaller office with Teresa's name on the door. Margaret took a deep breath, gathering courage, and knocked softly. A hoarse and firm voice invited her in. "Margaret, is that really you?" Teresa rose immediately, surprised to see her old friend at her office door. "How many years? What brings you here?" Teresa was a 65-year-old woman whose appearance screamed investigative journalist in every detail. Grey hair cut in a practical style, thick-framed glasses hanging on a chain around her neck, and perceptive eyes that seemed capable of seeing through the most well-constructed lies. The two women had been friends in their youth, but life had taken them down different paths, Margaret dedicating herself to family, and Teresa immersing herself in her journalistic career. Still, there was a mutual respect that time had not managed to erase. Margaret closed the door behind her, and without beating around the bush, poured out the whole story: the hasty marriage, her suspicions, the received photograph, and the humiliating expulsion from the party. "I need your help to find out who this woman really is," pleaded Margaret, her voice choked with contained emotion. "My son is in danger and nobody believes me." Teresa listened to everything in silence, her face revealing little, but her eyes recording every detail. When Margaret finished and showed the photograph on her cell phone, the journalist adjusted her glasses to better examine the image. There was a moment of hesitation. Investigating an influential businessman's wife, based only on a mother's intuition, and an anonymous photo was risky. It could just be maternal jealousy, something Teresa had witnessed countless times in her long career. Or it could be something much more sinister. "I understand your concern, Margaret, but I need to be honest. This might be nothing more than a manipulated photo sent by someone who wants to cause trouble," said Teresa, carefully choosing her words. "Or it could be exactly what you fear. The question is, am I willing to find out which of the two possibilities is true?" The tension in the small office was palpable. Margaret held her breath, her eyes fixed on her longtime friend, silently pleading. Teresa drummed her fingers on the desk, her mind calculating risks, possibilities, and consequences. Finally, the journalist let out a deep, resigned sigh, like someone who knows they're about to get involved in something bigger than they intended. "I'll help, not for you or for Robert, but for the truth," declared Teresa, reaching out to take Margaret's cell phone again. "If this woman is who you suspect, she must have left traces. No one is perfect at erasing their past, no matter how careful they are." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Teresa discreetly mobilized some of her most trusted contacts in the newsroom, a technology specialist, to analyze the photograph for metadata that could reveal its origin and authenticity, a young reporter to research public records of recent marriages, and a photographer to enlarge and improve the quality of the mysterious image. Teresa herself began working her sources in the police, people who owed favors to the perceptive journalist who, over the years, had kept far more secrets than she had revealed in her investigative articles. Margaret observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and growing anguish, aware that each passing minute was one less minute to save her son. "She seemed so perfect, Teresa," Margaret confessed as they waited for the first results. "Beautiful, educated, intelligent. She seemed to know exactly what to say to charm everyone. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, calculating, that no one else seemed to notice." Meanwhile, in a luxurious suite at the most exclusive hotel in the city, Christine walked across the spacious room with silent steps, like a graceful predator. Robert had gone into the shower, leaving her momentarily alone, an opportunity she wouldn't miss. With quick and precise movements, she took out a second cell phone, different from the one Robert knew about, hidden inside a secret compartment in her makeup case. She dialed a number from memory and waited, her green eyes constantly watching the closed bathroom door from where the sound of the shower came. "It's me," she said quietly when the call was answered. "We're already married. The transfers begin tomorrow on the honeymoon. In a week he'll be bankrupt and I'll be out of the country." The voice on the other end of the line said something that made Christine smile, a smile that never reached her cold eyes. It was the smile of a hunter who knows the prey is secure in the trap. She could hear the sound of running water diminishing, signaling that Robert was finishing his shower. "We need to get rid of his mother," Christine continued quickly. She suspects something. She received a photo of me. I don't know how. Take care of it. We can't have any more interference now that we're so close." Back at the newspaper office, the atmosphere had changed drastically. What had begun as an investigation based only on maternal instinct and a mysterious photo was now taking shape as something much more concrete and disturbing. In Teresa's office, now transformed into a kind of improvised headquarters, photos, documents, and notes covered a large wall, connected by colored wires as in a detective movie. The technology specialist had confirmed the photo wasn't manipulated but real, taken just 2 months ago in another country. The young reporter had discovered records that didn't add up. Christine Morrison didn't exist in official records before appearing in the city months ago. And most alarming, Teresa's contacts in the police had found matches of the photo with an international wanted persons file. "Christine Morrison is a false identity," explained Teresa, adjusting her glasses as she showed Margaret the police reports she had obtained through her contacts. "Her real name is Ashley. She's wanted in at least 2 countries for a series of sophisticated scams. Her specialty is marrying wealthy men, gaining access to their accounts and investments during the honeymoon, transferring fortunes to tax havens, and then disappearing without a trace." Margaret felt her blood freeze in her veins with each word Teresa uttered. It was one thing to suspect, another completely different to have confirmation of her worst fears. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the reports, where there were photos of Ashley with different looks, names and identities over the years, always elegant, always stunning, always beside successful businessmen who, invariably, appeared in later photos as shadows of themselves, financially and emotionally destroyed. "My God, Teresa, she's done this before. How many times?" asked Margaret, her voice almost inaudible as she scanned the documents detailing Ashley's crimes. Teresa hesitated, as if considering how much of the brutal truth Margaret could bear. But the journalist knew this was not the time for half-truths. "At least 3 times that we could confirm. One of them, a real estate businessman, lost absolutely everything. Fortune, company, reputation. The tragedy affected him deeply, and he couldn't overcome the trauma, with devastating consequences for his life." Teresa's eyes shifted to a particular photograph she had separated from the others. It was a photo of a middle-aged man at a funeral, supporting a young woman who was crying inconsolably. His daughter was devastated. She tried for months to prove that her father had been the victim of a scam, but without Ashley and without the money, there was no way to prove anything. The case was filed as an investor who made bad choices and couldn't handle bankruptcy. Margaret felt a wave of nausea and had to sit down. For a moment, she saw her own son in place of that man, destroyed, desperate, alone. The idea was unbearable. With renewed determination, she stood up, wiping away a stubborn tear that had escaped. "We need to stop her, Teresa. We need to save my son before it's too late," declared Margaret, her voice regaining its firmness. "How do we do this?" In the hotel suite, completely oblivious to the storm brewing against her, Ashley, using her Christine identity, was finalizing preparations for the honeymoon. Robert, fresh from the shower, wore a luxurious hotel robe and watched his wife with adoration as she organized their suitcases. "I still can't believe that in a few hours we'll be in paradise," he commented, approaching to embrace her from behind. "Far from everything and everyone, just the 2 of us." Ashley smiled, turning to kiss him softly on the lips. Her eyes, however, remained calculating, evaluating every gesture, every word, maintaining the perfect performance of the loving wife. "I can hardly wait, my love. It will be the beginning of our life together, of so many new things." Back at the newsroom, Teresa was making frantic calls while her improvised team continued to collect more evidence. The complete picture of Ashley's crimes was forming quickly, more extensive and sophisticated than initially imagined. She wasn't just a scammer, but the leader of an international network targeting wealthy men in various countries. Each con was meticulously planned, with false identities created months in advance, background stories verifiable with a superficial look, and complex financial operations that made it difficult to track the money. "We need the police," Margaret insisted, pressing Teresa, who seemed hesitant. "With all this evidence, they can arrest her before she does more harm." Teresa shook her head, frustration evident on her experienced face. It's not that simple. We need concrete evidence that she's committing a crime now, not just past crimes in other countries. Without that, the police can't simply invade a hotel and arrest the newlywed of one of the most influential businessmen in the city. It was at that moment that one of Teresa's young assistants burst into the room, breathless, holding a report he had just printed. "We found something. A suspicious transfer has already been authorized from Robert's main account for tomorrow morning. 5 million to an account in the Cayman Islands." Teresa snatched the report from the young man's hands, her experienced eyes running through the technical information. Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. The evidence they needed was there, but it came with a new desperate urgency. Robert and Ashley would leave for their honeymoon in a few hours, and as soon as they reached their destination, far from the watchful eyes of anyone who could interfere, the plan would go into action. The money would begin to flow to inaccessible accounts, and when Robert finally realized, it would be too late. "We have to reach them before they board," Teresa declared, already picking up the phone to make another call. "I'll contact my police connections right now, but we need a plan, a way to confront her with all this evidence at once, without giving her a chance to escape or deny." Margaret nodded, her mind working as quickly as her racing heart allowed. Time was running out. Her son was about to embark on a journey that could cost not only his fortune but potentially his life. Considering the tragic fate of one of Ashley's previous victims, the race against time had begun, and the battle for truth was about to reach its climax. "I won't allow her to destroy my son," Margaret promised, her voice trembling with emotion but resolute. "Even if I have to confront her myself at the airport." The exclusive resort gleamed under the evening sun, its meticulously maintained gardens and crystal-clear pools creating an atmosphere of earthly paradise. Robert and Christine had arrived just a few hours earlier, welcomed with chilled champagne and flower petals scattered along the path to the presidential suite. For Robert, each moment seemed like it was from a perfect dream. The dream wedding followed by a honeymoon at one of the world's most luxurious and exclusive resorts. He watched his wife unpacking with graceful movements, still amazed by her beauty and the luck he had in finding her. The incident with his mother at the wedding remained an unpleasant shadow in his mind, but he was determined not to let it spoil the happiest moments of his life. Christine, meanwhile, maintained her perfect smile, but her green eyes constantly checked the clock and the phone, like someone waiting for an important confirmation. "This place is even more amazing than in the photos," Robert commented, approaching to embrace her from behind as she organized some dresses in the closet. "We have a whole week just for us, without interference, without problems, without, well, you know, just you and me." "I can hardly wait for us to really start our life together," Christine replied, turning to kiss him with calculated enthusiasm. "Tonight will be special. I've heard the gala show at the resort theater is not to be missed." Meanwhile, on a plane cutting through the skies toward the same destination, Margaret and Teresa sat side by side, tense and silent. Around them, 3 plainclothes police officers reviewed documents and exchanged information in hushed voices. The operation had been assembled in record time thanks to Teresa's contacts and the damning evidence they had gathered on Ashley, or Christine, as Robert knew her. Falsified documents, multiple identities, records of previous marriages followed by million-dollar embezzlements, and, most alarming, the already scheduled transfer of Robert's account to a network of ghost accounts abroad. The police were initially reluctant to act, but when an on-duty judge saw the evidence and the magnitude of the scam about to happen, he authorized the operation immediately. Now they were flying against time, knowing that Ashley had probably already initiated her plan. "I'm scared, Teresa," Margaret confessed, her voice barely a whisper as the plane began its descent. "Not about the money, but about Robert. You saw what happened to that other man, how he ended up. I couldn't bear to see my son like that." "Oh, we'll stop her before it's too late," Teresa assured her, squeezing her friend's hand firmly. "This time she won't escape. This time she'll face justice for everything she's done." At the resort, night had fallen, and the property's grand theater was illuminated for the gala performance that took place every week, an exclusive attraction for the most privileged guests. The atmosphere was one of extreme elegance. Crystal chandeliers, red velvet-lined seats, waiters in formal attire circulating with champagne flutes and gourmet canapes. Robert had reserved a table in the special area, with a privileged view of the stage where an international-level musical show was about to begin. He felt on top of the world, a successful man with a stunning wife, a life many could only dream of. Christine wore a red dress that seemed to have been sewn onto her body, impeccably arranged hair, and discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, gifts from Robert during their brief and intense dating period. "You look absolutely stunning," said Robert, unable to take his eyes off her as they sat down. "Every man envies me right now, I'm sure, and I can't blame them." "This is just the beginning of our life together," Christine replied, her perfect smile lighting up her face, but her eyes continued to discreetly check her cell phone under the table. "Soon we'll be celebrating many more achievements." The show began promptly, a sophisticated musical production with professional singers and a live orchestra. The lights dimmed, and the audience immersed themselves in the experience. Robert was completely engaged, but Christine seemed distant, checking her phone increasingly frequently and anxiously. One message in particular seemed to deeply disturb her. Her elegant fingers gripped the device tightly, and a shadow of concern crossed her perfect face before she managed to recompose her mask of happiness. Something had gone wrong with her plans, but she couldn't show it. Not now. Not when she was so close to completing the biggest con of her career. "Is everything all right?" Robert asked, noticing her restlessness. "You seem worried about something." "Just a message from the spa confirming our treatment tomorrow," Christine lied, with the ease of someone who did this professionally. "Nothing to worry about, my love. Let's enjoy the show." The first part of the performance went without incident, a mix of classical and contemporary music that kept the elegant audience completely captivated. When the lights came on for the intermission, Robert suggested they get more champagne. It was at that exact moment that the unthinkable happened. The side doors of the theater opened simultaneously, and 3 police officers in formal attire, but with clearly visible badges, entered with determined steps. Behind them, to Robert's absolute shock, came his mother, Margaret, and a woman he didn't immediately recognize. The buzz of conversations that had filled the environment during the intermission gradually ceased as curious gazes turned to the unusual scene. "What's happening?" Robert muttered, completely confused, as he watched his mother walk determinedly toward the stage. "What is my mother doing here?" "We need to leave now," Christine hissed, her face suddenly pale beneath her perfect makeup. "Now, Robert, let's go to the bedroom immediately." On stage, one of the policemen briefly conversed with the master of ceremonies, who seemed shocked but nodded and handed over the microphone. Margaret, with impressive dignity for her 70 years, climbed the few steps leading to the elevated platform, accompanied by Teresa, who carried a small electronic device. The other 2 officers had positioned themselves strategically at the theater exits, clearly preventing any escape attempt. The audience, now in complete silence, watched the extraordinary scene unfold, like spectators of a drama that had suddenly crossed the boundaries from stage to real life. "I have an important announcement to make," said Margaret, her voice trembling slightly at first but gaining firmness with each word. "I ask for everyone's attention, especially that of my son Robert, who is present in this room." Christine grabbed Robert's arm with surprising strength for a woman of her stature, her perfect nails digging into his skin through the fabric of his jacket. Her face was a mask of poorly disguised panic as she continued trying to pull him out of the room. But Robert was paralyzed, as if his legs had turned to lead, unable to take his eyes off his mother's figure on the illuminated stage. The tension in the environment was almost palpable, hundreds of breaths suspended in anticipation of what would come next. "Robert, my son," Margaret continued, her eyes finding his in the audience. "Margaret, this woman beside me is Teresa, a respected investigative journalist. Over the past 2 days, she and her team have discovered something you need to know immediately, something about the woman you just married." Teresa stepped forward, connecting her device to a projector that the theater used for visual effects during performances. In seconds, a giant image illuminated the screen at the back of the stage. It was Christine, but with another name, in another wedding, smiling the same calculated smile next to another man. The date in the corner of the photo was from just months ago. A murmur of astonishment ran through the audience, like a wave beginning to gain strength. Robert felt his world begin to spin, unable to process what he was seeing. Beside him, Christine had ceased her attempts to drag him out and was now completely still, like a cornered animal assessing its chances of escape. The woman who presents herself as Christine Morrison is, in fact, Ashley Davis, explained Teresa, her professional voice echoing through the theater's sound system. An international con artist wanted in at least 2 countries for fraud, scamming, and use of false identities. The images now rapidly succeeded one another on the screen. Falsified documents, police records, newspaper headlines from various countries showing previous cases. Then, most devastating, screenshots of bank transfers initiated from Robert's accounts, digitally signed in the last 24 hours, sending enormous sums to obscure destinations abroad. The audience watched in absolute shock, some with cell phones raised recording the extraordinary moment. Robert felt as if he were in a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken, his certainties crumbling like a house of cards in the wind. "This is madness," finally shouted Christine, or Ashley, rising from her chair with an abrupt movement. "This ridiculous show is just another desperate attempt by a jealous mother who can't stand to see her son happy with another woman." "Ashley Davis," formally announced the officer who had remained on stage, his grave and official voice cutting through the theater like a blade. "You are under arrest for fraud, scamming, and use of false identity. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." It was as if a spell had been broken. Ashley looked frantically around like a cornered animal, then violently pushed Robert aside and tried to run toward one of the side exits. Her desperate escape lasted only a few seconds before the strategically positioned officers intercepted her. The scene that followed was chaotic, Ashley struggling furiously, shouting accusations and threats while being restrained and handcuffed. Her mask of sophistication and charm had completely disappeared, revealing the true nature behind the carefully constructed facade. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she screamed, her face contorted in a fury that made her almost unrecognizable. "I'm not alone in this. My associates are already at the resort and they will complete the job. The money is already moving, and you will never recover it." Robert remained in absolute shock, unable to move, as he watched the woman who less than 24 hours ago had promised to love him forever being dragged out of the theater. His body moved automatically, following the bizarre procession through the luxurious resort lobby, where elegant guests watched the scene with a mixture of morbid curiosity and discomfort. Margaret quickly descended from the stage and rushed to her son's side, her face marked by concern and the unconditional love that only a mother could demonstrate in such a moment. "Robert, my son, I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said softly, gently touching his arm. "We did everything we could to stop her before it was too late." "Too late?" repeated Robert, his voice distant, as if he were speaking in a dream. What did she mean by "the money is already moving"? It was Teresa who answered, approaching with a tablet where banking data was displayed in real time. "She has already initiated transfers. We managed to block most of them, but—" Teresa hesitated, her experienced eyes revealing that there was more bad news to come. "Approximately 2 million has already been transferred to a network of offshore accounts before we could intervene. Financial police are trying to trace them, but reality finally hit Robert with the force of a high-speed train. It wasn't just his heart that had been manipulated and betrayed, but also his fortune, his reputation, his entire life. He looked at his mother, the woman he had humiliated and expelled from his wedding for trying to warn him, and felt an overwhelming wave of shame and regret. Ashley's words echoed in his mind. Associates at the resort. The job being completed even without her. The threat hadn't ended. "We need to find these accomplices," declared Robert, finally recovering part of his composure. "If she has associates here, we need to stop them before they cause more damage." "The police are already searching the resort," informed Teresa, indicating several agents who were now spreading throughout the lobby, some clearly requesting lists of recent staff and guests. "They are also in contact with financial authorities to try to freeze any suspicious transactions." Outside the resort, in the parking lot illuminated by soft lights, Ashley was being placed in the back of a police car. Her stunning red dress dramatically contrasted with the handcuffs on her delicate wrists. She kept her chin up, an artificial dignity even in defeat. When she saw Robert approaching, followed by Margaret and Teresa, a cold, calculating smile formed on her painted lips. You really believe it's over? She challenged, her green eyes gleaming with malice. This is just the beginning of your problems, Robert. When my associates are finished, you'll wish you'd never met your dear, meddling mother. Who are they? Demanded Robert, his voice trembling with contained anger. Who else is involved in this? Ashley merely laughed, a cold sound without humor that seemed to freeze the air around them. You'll find out soon, very soon. As the police car drove away, taking Ashley with it, Robert remained motionless, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. 2 million lost. A woman who never existed. A honeymoon transformed into a nightmare. And the shame, the overwhelming shame of having doubted the only person who had always loved him unconditionally. He turned to face his mother, tears finally overcoming his resistance and flowing freely down his face. "Mom, I don't even know where to begin asking for forgiveness," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You tried to warn me, and I humiliated you. I threw you out." "It's okay," soothed Margaret, pulling her son into a tight embrace as she used to do when he was just a frightened boy. "This isn't the time for that now. We need to focus on minimizing the damage and finding these accomplices." At that moment, among the curious guests who had come out to watch the arrest, a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance began to discreetly move away. His movements were calculated not to draw attention, but Teresa's experienced eyes, trained by decades of investigative journalism, caught the suspicious behavior. With a subtle movement, she alerted one of the nearby police officers, who immediately understood the situation. Within seconds, the man was approached and, upon realizing he had been noticed, tried to run. The chase was brief and ended with one more suspect detained. The courtroom vibrated with tension months after the arrest of Ashley and her accomplices. The room was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and victims of similar scams. Ashley, without her flawless makeup and stunning dresses, looked ordinary in her inmate attire, but maintained her calculating eyes, analyzing everyone present. Beside her, 5 accomplices formed a somber line: the fake brother, 2 fake hotel employees, an IT specialist, and an older man who appeared to be the financial mentor. The evidence collected by Teresa formed stacks of documents on the prosecutor's table. "I've never seen a case with such abundant and irrefutable evidence," commented the prosecutor. "That journalist's report practically did our work for us." Robert waited in an adjacent room, nervous not about facing Ashley, but about the embarrassment of being in the same environment as his mother, whom he still hadn't properly apologized to. He had lost 2 million that would never be fully recovered, but the scam could have been much worse without his mother's intervention. "Mr. Robert, they're calling you to testify," informed a court officer. "Are you ready to enter?" "I'm ready to end this once and for all," Robert replied, adjusting his tie and standing up with determination. "I've allowed that woman to control my life for too long." The moment Robert entered the courtroom and walked to the witness stand seemed to last an eternity. Each step echoed on the marble floor of the silent hall, hundreds of eyes following his figure. He deliberately avoided looking at the defendant's bench where Ashley was seated, but he could feel the weight of her gaze like something physical, an uncomfortable pressure that seemed to want to pierce his determination. Instead, his eyes quickly scanned the audience, instinctively looking for his mother. He didn't see her initially, and a pang of disappointment hit him. Perhaps she had decided not to come. Perhaps she was still too hurt by his behavior. The oath was administered and Robert sat down, finally forcing himself to face the woman he had known as Christine. For a brief moment their gazes crossed, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. There was no remorse in those green eyes, only cold calculation, as if she was still evaluating ways to use the situation to her advantage. "Mr. Robert, please describe to the court how you met the defendant and the events that led to your marriage," requested the prosecutor, initiating what would be a painful but necessary testimony. "I met Ashley, or Christine as she introduced herself, at a charity event months ago," began Robert, his voice initially hesitant but gaining firmness as he spoke. "She seemed to know exactly what to say, as if she had studied my tastes and interests. Now I know that's exactly what she did." For almost an hour, Robert meticulously detailed how Ashley had infiltrated his life, gradually isolating him from friends and family, especially his mother, creating a world where only the 2 of them existed. He described how she subtly began to ask for access to his accounts, always with plausible excuses: financial planning for the future, joint investments, arrangements for the honeymoon. The court listened in silence, occasionally interrupted by whispers of recognition from other victims present, who had gone through identical experiences. The most difficult moment came when Robert needed to describe the scene at the wedding, how he had publicly humiliated his own mother when she tried to warn him, how he had chosen to believe a stranger instead of the woman who had raised and loved him unconditionally throughout his life. His voice faltered at this point, and he needed a few moments to compose himself. "I threw her out of my wedding," admitted Robert, the shame evident in every syllable. "My own mother, who was just trying to protect me, and I treated her as if she were an intruder trying to ruin my happiness. It was the biggest mistake of my life, even greater than having trusted Ashley." When he finished his testimony, emotionally exhausted but somehow relieved to have told his story, Robert finally allowed his eyes to scan the audience again. That's when he saw her, his mother, Margaret, sitting discreetly in the last row, almost hidden behind a column. His heart leaped when he realized she had been there the whole time, listening to every word. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw in them not the condemnation he feared, but love and understanding. Before he could react, he was dismissed by the judge and directed back to his seat. Teresa, sitting not far from Margaret, discreetly waved to him, a gesture of solidarity that warmed his heart. The journalist had become an unexpected ally, not only in exposing the criminal scheme, but also in rebuilding his relationship with his mother. Mr. Roberts' testimony aligns perfectly with the documented pattern of behavior of the accused in previous cases, stated the prosecutor, addressing the judge. As the evidence clearly demonstrates, this was not an isolated incident, but part of a sophisticated and recurring scheme that has already victimized businessmen in multiple countries. During the remainder of the afternoon, the court heard testimonies from financial experts who explained in technical detail how Ashley and her accomplices had operated, creating a complex network of phantom accounts and shell companies to launder money stolen from their victims. Teresa was called to testify about her journalistic investigation, which had connected seemingly isolated cases into a clear pattern of fraud. Her series of reports, published in the weeks following Ashley's arrest, had not only exposed the current scheme but also helped identify previous victims who had been manipulated into not filing complaints, believing they had simply made bad investments or had been abandoned by a wife who left them for personal reasons. The extensive documentation presented by Teresa revealed the true scale of the operation. More than 15 businessmen had been defrauded in different countries, with total losses estimated in the tens of millions. The gang operated with frightening efficiency, Teresa explained to the court, her voice professional but laden with indignation. They carefully selected their victims, successful businessmen, usually single or divorced without children, with few strong family ties. Ashley was just the visible face, the attractive bait who gained the victim's trust, while the others operated behind the scenes, researching, planning, and executing the financial transfers as soon as access was guaranteed. As the trial approached its conclusion, the defense made desperate attempts to mitigate the charges, claiming that the transfers had been voluntarily authorized by the victims or that they were legitimate gifts from husbands to their wives. These arguments sounded hollow in the face of the overwhelming volume of evidence presented by the prosecution. When the time came for closing arguments, the prosecutor summarized the case against Ashley and her accomplices in a forceful manner, highlighting not only the financial crimes, but the human cost of their actions: destroyed relationships, shattered trust, and in the most extreme case, a life lost to suicide. The courtroom was silent as a tomb when the judge withdrew to deliberate on the sentence. Ashley remained impassive, as if watching a boring movie that did not directly involve her. "How can she stay so calm?" Robert asked Teresa during the recess, observing Ashley casually conversing with her lawyer. "After everything she did, all the lives she destroyed." "Sir, people like her don't feel remorse like we do," replied Teresa, her experienced eyes studying the criminal across the room. "For Ashley, this is just a temporary setback, a professional risk. She's probably already planning her next move, even knowing she'll spend years in prison." The moment of sentencing arrived with an almost palpable tension in the air. The judge returned to the courtroom with a grave expression, adjusting his glasses as he prepared to announce his decision. Ashley finally showed a reaction, a slight stiffening of the shoulders, a glimmer of apprehension in her usually cold eyes. Her accomplices seemed to have shrunk in their seats, as if the reality of their situation had finally become impossible to ignore. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop when the judge began to speak, his clear, firm voice echoing through the hall. After carefully considering all the evidence presented and the severity of the crimes committed, the judge solemnly announced, "This court sentences Ashley Davis to 15 years in prison for fraud, confidence schemes, ideological falsehood, and use of false identity. Additionally, she is required to return all illegally acquired assets, which will be auctioned for partial compensation of the victims." A murmur of approval ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the bang of the judge's gavel. The accomplices received similar sentences, ranging from 10 to 12 years depending on their degree of involvement and prior criminal history. For the first time since the beginning of the trial, Ashley's mask of indifference completely broke. Her face turned pale, her eyes widened in genuine shock. Perhaps she had really believed that somehow she would manage to manipulate the system in her favor, as she had done so many times before with individuals. When the officers approached to escort her out of the courtroom, she cast a final glance at Robert, no longer seductive or manipulative, but filled with pure, incandescent hatred that finally revealed her true nature. "This isn't over," she hissed as she was led out. "You'll regret crossing my path, Robert. 15 years go by quickly." "Yes, it is over, Ashley," Robert replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "You no longer have power over me or anyone else here." As the courtroom began to empty, Robert remained seated, processing everything that had happened. The case was closed, justice had been served, but he still had a crucial matter to resolve. With his heart beating hard, he stood up and walked toward the back of the hall where his mother was still sitting, talking quietly with Teresa. When the two women saw him approach, they immediately stopped talking. Teresa smiled gently, murmured something to Margaret, and discreetly moved away, giving them privacy for what would certainly be a difficult and emotional conversation. Robert stopped in front of his mother, suddenly insecure, like a boy who doesn't know how to apologize for breaking something precious. "Mom, you came," was all he could initially say, his trembling voice betraying the emotional storm within him. "I wasn't sure if you would come after everything." "Of course I would come, son," Margaret replied simply, her eyes full of unconditional love that Robert knew he didn't deserve. "I will always be by your side, no matter what happens." A few days after the trial, on a sunny afternoon that seemed to want to contradict the somber events of the previous weeks, Robert parked his car in front of the simple house where his mother lived. The modest residence contrasted drastically with the mansion where he lived, a constant reminder of the different choices mother and son had made in life. Margaret had always preferred a discreet existence without ostentation, while Robert had been attracted to the luxury and status that his fortune could buy. Now, looking at the small house with its carefully maintained garden and colorful curtains in the windows, he felt a wave of affection and nostalgia. This place had always been more home than any of the expensive properties he had acquired over the years. With a bouquet of flowers in his hands, yellow daisies his mother's favorites, and his heart beating rapidly, he walked to the door and rang the doorbell, feeling strangely like a nervous visitor instead of the son who had grown up running through that same garden. "I'm coming," came the familiar voice from inside the house, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. When the door opened, Margaret seemed genuinely surprised to see her son standing there. There was a moment of silence as mother and son looked at each other, decades of shared history and weeks of recent pain hanging in the air between them. Robert cleared his throat, extending the bouquet of flowers as an inadequate peace offering for the magnitude of his mistake. "Mom," he began, his voice choked with emotion he could no longer contain. "I was so blind. You risked our relationship to save me, even after how I treated you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for what I did, but I needed to come here and tell you personally how sorry I am, how much I regret it, and how grateful I am that you never gave up on me." The words, mentally rehearsed all the way there, now seemed insufficient as they were being said. How could he express in a few sentences the regret for having betrayed the most fundamental trust of his life. How could he adequately thank the person who had sacrificed her own pride and dignity to save him? No words seemed capable of encompassing the depth of his feelings. Margaret looked at her son for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears that reflected those now flowing freely down Robert's face. Then, without saying anything, she simply opened her arms. Robert stepped forward, enveloping his mother in a tight embrace that said more than any elaborate speech could express. "You're my son," Margaret finally said, her voice soft but firm. "Nothing in the world could make me give up on you or stop loving you." Inside the cozy house, Teresa was waiting in the small living room, a cup of tea in her hands. She smiled as she saw mother and son entering together, Margaret now arranging the flowers in a vase, while Robert looked around, absorbing the familiar details of the place where he had grown up, the photographs on the walls, the simple but well-maintained furniture, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and homemade cookies. The journalist had become a constant presence in Margaret's life since the incident, a renewed friendship that had blossomed between the two women during the tense days of the investigation and trial. Now, Teresa seemed almost part of the family, her sharp intelligence and sense of justice perfectly complementing Margaret's wisdom and compassion. She placed the newspaper she was reading on the coffee table, turning it so Robert could see the bold headline, "Wedding Scammer Loses Everything, Gang's Assets to be Auctioned to Compensate Victims." "I just received the special edition," explained Teresa, indicating the newspaper with a nod. "I made a point of bringing it personally for you to see." Robert picked up the paper, his eyes quickly scanning the meticulously written article that detailed how the assets accumulated by Ashley and her accomplices through years of scams were being confiscated and prepared for auction. Luxury homes, sports cars, jewelry, works of art, a fortune built on the suffering of countless victims that would now be partially reversed to compensate them. But it was the photograph in the corner of the page that captured his attention most completely. Ashley being transferred to the prison where she would serve her long sentence. Without the sophisticated makeup, perfectly arranged hair and designer clothes, she looked remarkably ordinary, almost unrecognizable. The orange prison uniform replaced the elegant dresses, and her eyes, once hypnotic and seductive, now seemed dull and defeated. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who had nearly destroyed his life. "It's as if they were two completely different people," Robert murmured, still staring fixedly at the photograph. "How could I not notice? How was I so easily deceived?" "People like Ashley are specialists in creating exactly the persona that their victims want to see," Teresa explained gently. "Don't blame yourself for falling for the scam. Much more experienced and cautious men have gone through the same situation." Months passed quickly, bringing profound changes to Robert's life. The scandal that initially threatened his reputation ended up transforming into an unexpected opportunity for redemption and purpose. Inspired by the traumatic experience and Teresa's investigative work, he decided to use a significant part of his fortune to create a foundation dedicated to identifying scammers and protecting potential victims. Margaret, with her natural wisdom and ability to identify warning signs that others ignored, became a valuable advisor to the organization. Teresa, impressed with Robert's genuine transformation and passionate about the cause, accepted the invitation to become the Foundation's communications director, using her journalistic skills to educate the public about the increasingly sophisticated methods used by modern scammers. The Foundation's work quickly gained recognition, especially after helping to unmask 2 other fraudulent schemes in the first months of operation. "I never imagined that something so positive could emerge from such a painful experience," Robert commented during a board meeting, observing the preliminary reports of successful cases. "If we can prevent even a single person from going through what I went through, it will have been worth it." At a charity gala to raise funds for the Foundation, the elegant hall was filled with influential guests and, more importantly, people who had been directly or indirectly affected by scams, similar to what Robert had suffered. Among them was the daughter of the businessman who had committed suicide after being ruined by Ashley in one of her previous scams, now an active collaborator of the Foundation and a powerful symbol of the importance of its work. The most anticipated moment of the night was Robert's speech, his first formal public appearance to speak openly about his experience. Dressed in an elegant but discreet suit, he took the stage to warm applause. Margaret and Teresa watched proudly from the front row, their faces reflecting the extraordinary journey that had united them in ways none of them could have predicted. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here," Robert began, his voice clear and confident echoing through the silent hall. "A year ago, I was celebrating what I believed to be the happiest day of my life, my marriage to a woman who, as I discovered later, never really existed. What followed was a painful journey of discovery, shame, and finally, redemption. I learned in the hardest way that we must listen to those who truly love us, even when their words aren't what we want to hear. My mother tried to warn me, and I rejected her, preferring to believe in the carefully constructed fantasy that had been created to deceive me." His voice faltered slightly as he looked at Margaret, whose eyes shone with contained tears. The connection between mother and son, previously damaged by Ashley's manipulation, was now stronger than ever, forged in the fire of shared adversity and sincere reconciliation. In the audience, several victims of Ashley and her accomplices, now united in a community of survivors, nodded in silent understanding. Each of them had traveled their own path of recovery, not just financial, but emotional and psychological. The foundation had become a space for healing as much as prevention, a place where victims could transform their traumatic experiences into tools to protect others. Today we are here not only to mourn what we lost, but to celebrate what we gained. Greater awareness, a strengthened community, and tools to prevent others from suffering the same fate, continued Robert, his speech gaining strength and conviction. Every penny raised tonight will be invested in protecting potential victims. While Robert's inspiring speech was broadcast live, Ashley watched from prison on a small communal television. Her face, without the glamour that once defined her, was tense with anger. The prisoner's uniform replaced designer dresses, and her hair was tied in a simple ponytail. Beside her, a crumpled letter, yet another lawyer refusing to represent her in her desperate appeal. The evidence against her was indestructible thanks to Teresa's work. "Enjoy your moment of glory while you can, Robert," she muttered, tearing the letter to pieces. 15 years isn't that long. But Ashley knew her threat was empty. The empire she had built was completely dismantled. Her methods, once secret, were now studied by Robert's foundation. For the first time in her life, Ashley faced a reality she couldn't manipulate, the complete collapse of everything she had built. Did you like Robert and Margaret's story? Then subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's one more story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.